There is, and always has been, a widespread belief in fate or destiny, that is, in an eternal and inscrutable power which apportions definite ends to both individuals and nations. This belief has arisen from long observation of the facts of life. Men are conscious that there are certain occurrences which they cannot control and are powerless to avert. Birth and death, for instance, are inevitable, and many of the incidents of life appear equally inevitable. Men strain every nerve for the attainment of certain ends, and gradually they become conscious of a power which seems to be not of themselves, which frustrates their puny efforts and laughs, as it were, at their fruitless striving and struggle. As men advance in life, they learn to submit, more or less, to this overruling power which they do not understand, perceiving only its effects in themselves and the world around them. And they call it by various names, such as God, Providence, Fate, Destiny, etc. Men of contemplation, such as poets and philosophers, step aside, as it were, to watch the movements of this mysterious power as it seems to elevate its favorites on the one hand and strike down its victims on the other, without reference to merit or demerit. The greatest poets, especially the dramatic poets, represent this power in their works as they have observed it in nature. The Greek and Roman dramatists usually depict their heroes as having foreknowledge of their fate and taking means to escape it. But by doing so, they blindly involve themselves in a series of consequences which bring about the doom which they are trying to avert. Shakespeare's characters, on the other hand, are represented as a nature with no foreknowledge except in the form of presentiment of their particular destiny. Thus, according to the poets, whether the man knows his fate or not, he cannot avert it, and every conscious or unconscious act of his is a step towards it. Every conscious or unconscious act of his is a step towards it. Omar Khayyam's moving finger is a vivid expression of this idea of fate. The moving finger writes, and having read, moves on. Nor all thy piety nor wit shall lure it back to cancel half a line, nor all thy tears wash out a word of it. Thus, men in all nations and times have experienced in their lives the action of this invincible power or law, and in our nation today, this experience has been crystallized in the terse proverb man proposes, God disposes. But, contradictory as it may appear, there is an equally widespread belief in man's responsibility as a free agent. All moral teaching is an affirmation of man's freedom to choose his course and mold his destiny. And man's patient and untiring efforts in achieving his ends are declarations of consciousness of freedom and power. This dual experience of fate on the one hand and freedom on the other has given rise to the interminable controversy between the believers in fatalism and the upholders of free will, a controversy which was recently revived under the term determinism versus free will. Between apparently conflicting extremes, there is always a middle way of balance, justice, or compensation, which, while it includes both extremes, cannot be said to be either one or the other, and which brings both into harmony, and this middle way is the point of contact between two extremes. Truth cannot be a partisan, but by its nature is the reconciler of extremes. And so, in the matter which we are considering, there is a golden mean which brings fate and free will into close relationship, wherein indeed it is seen that these two indisputable facts in human life, for such they are but two aspects of one central law, one unifying and all embracing principle, namely the law of causation in its moral aspect. Moral causation necessitates both fate and free will, both individual responsibility and individual predestination. For the law of causes must also be the law of effects, and cause and effect must always be equal. The train of causation, both in matter and mind, must be eternally balanced, therefore eternally, just eternally perfect. Thus, every effect may be said to be a thing preordained, but the predetermining power is a cause and not the fiat of an arbitrary will. Man finds himself involved in the train of causation. His life is made up of causes and effects. It is both a sowing and a reaping. Each act of his is a cause which must be balanced by its effects. He chooses the cause. This is free will. He cannot choose, alter, or avert the effect. This is fate. Thus, free will stands for the power to initiate causes, and destiny is involvement in effects. It is therefore true that man is predestined to certain ends, but he himself has, though he knows it not, issued the mandate that good or evil thing from which there is no escape he has, by his own deeds, brought about. It may here be urged that man is not responsible for his deeds, that these are the effects of his character, and that he is not responsible for the character, good or bad, which was given him at his birth. If character was given him at birth, this would be true, and there would then be no moral law, and no need for moral teaching. But characters are not given ready made, they are evolved. They are indeed effects, the products of the moral law itself, that is, the products of deeds. Character result of an accumulation of deeds which have been piled up, so to speak, by the individual during his life. Man is the doer of his own deeds. As such, he is the maker of his own character. And as the doer of his deeds and the maker of his character, he is the molder and shaper of his destiny. He has the power to modify and alter his deeds. And every time he acts, he modifies his character. And with the modification of his character for good or evil, he is predetermining for himself new destinies. Destinies disastrous or beneficent in accordance with the nature of his deeds. Character's destiny itself, as a fixed combination of deeds, it bears within itself the results of those deeds. These results lie hidden as moral seeds in the dark recesses of the character, awaiting their season of germination, growth, and fruitage. Those things which befall a man are the reflections of himself. That destiny which pursued him, which he was powerless to escape by effort or avert by prayer, was the relentless goal of his own wrong deeds, demanding and enforcing restitution. Those blessings and curses which come to him unbidden are the reverberating echoes of the sounds which he himself sent forth. It is this knowledge of the perfect law working through and above all things, of the perfect justice operating in and adjusting all human affairs, that enables the good man to love his enemies and to rise above all hatred, resentment, and complaining, for he knows that only his own can come to him, and that, though he be surrounded by persecutors, his enemies are but the blind instruments of a faultless retribution, and so he blames them not, but calmly receives his accounts and patiently pays his moral debts. But this is not all. He does not merely pay his debts, he takes care not to contract any further debts. He watches himself and makes his deeds faultless. While paying off evil accounts, he is laying up good accounts. By putting an end to his own sin, he is bringing evil and suffering to an end. And now let us consider how the law operates in particular instances in the overworking of destiny through deeds and character. First, we will look at this present life, for the present is the synthesis of the entire past, the net result of all that a man has ever thought and done is contained within him. It is noticeable that sometimes the good man fails and the unscrupulous man prospers. A fact which seems to pull all moral maxims as to the good results of righteousness out of account. And because of this, many people deny the operation of any just law in human life and even declare that it is chiefly the unjust that prosper. Nevertheless, the moral law exists, and it is not altered or subverted by shallow conclusions. It should be remembered that man is a changing, evolving being. The good man was not always good, the bad man was not always bad. Even in this life, there was a time in a large number of instances when the man who is now just was unjust, when he who is now kind was cruel, when he who is now pure was impure. Conversely, there was a time in this life in a number of instances when he who is now unjust was just, when he who is now cruel was kind, when he who is now impure was pure. Thus, the good man who is overtaken by calamity today is reaping the result of his former evil sowing. Later, he will reap the happy result of his present good sowing, while the bad man is now reaping the result of his former good sowing. Later, he will reap the result of his present sowing of bad. Characteristics are fixed habits of mind, the results of deeds. An act repeated a large number of times becomes unconscious or automatic, that is, it then seems to repeat itself without any effort on the part of the doer, so that it seems to him almost impossible not to do it, and then it has become a mental characteristic. Here is a poor man out of work. He is honest and is not a shirker. He wants work and cannot get it. He tries hard and continues to fail. Where is the justice in his lot? There was a time in this man's condition when he had plenty of work. He felt burdened with it. He shirked it and longed for ease. He thought how delightful it would be to have nothing to do. He did not appreciate the blessedness of his lot. His desire for ease is now gratified, but the fruit for which he longed and which he thought would taste so sweet has turned to ashes in his mouth. The condition which he aimed for, namely, to have nothing to do, he has reached, and there he is compelled to remain till his lesson is thoroughly learned. And he is surely learning that habitual ease is degrading, that to have nothing to do is a condition of wretchedness, and that work is a noble and blessed thing. His former desires and deeds have brought him where he is, and now his present desire for work, his ceaseless searching and asking for it, will just as surely bring about its own beneficial result. No longer desiring idleness, his present condition will, as an effect, the cause of which is no longer propagated, soon pass away, and he will obtain employment. And if his whole mind is now set on work, and he desires it above all else, then, when it comes, he will be overwhelmed with it. It will flow into him from all sides, and he will prosper in his industry. Then, if he does not understand the law of cause and effect in human life, he will wonder why work comes to him apparently unsought, while others who seek it strenuously fail to obtain it. Nothing comes unbidden. Where the shadow is, there also is the substance. That which comes to the individual is the product of his own deeds. As cheerful industry leads to greater industry and increasing prosperity, and labor, shirked or undertaken discontentedly, leads to a lesser degree of labor and decreasing prosperity. So, with all the varied conditions of life as we see them, they are the destinies wrought by the thoughts and deeds of each particular individual. So also, with the vast variety of characters, they are the ripening and ripened growth of the sowing of deeds. As the individual reaps when he sows, so the nation, being a community of individuals, reaps also what it sows. Nations become great when their leaders are just men. They fall and fade when their just men pass away. Those who are in power set an example, good or bad, for the entire nation. Great will be the peace and prosperity of a nation when there shall arise within it a line of statesmen who, having first established themselves in a lofty integrity of character, shall direct the energies of the nation toward the culture of virtue and development of character, knowing that only through personal industry, integrity, and nobility can national prosperity proceed. Still, above all, is the great law, calmly and with infallible justice, meting out to mortals their fleeing destinies, tear stained or smiling, the fabric of their hands. Life is a great school for the development of character. And all, through strife and struggle, vice and virtue, success and failure, are slowly but surely learning the lessons of wisdom. We live in a scientific age. Men of science are numbered by thousands, and they are ceaselessly searching, analyzing, and experimenting with a view to discovery and the increase of knowledge. The shelves of our libraries, both public and private, are heavy with their load of imposing volumes on scientific subjects, and the wonderful achievements of modern science are always before us, whether in our homes or in our streets, in country or town, on land or sea. There shall we have before us some marvelous device, some recent accomplishment of science for adding to our comfort, increasing our speed, or saving the labor of our hands. Yet, with all our vast store of scientific knowledge and its startling and rapidly increasing results in the world of discovery and invention, there is in this age one branch of science which has so far fallen into decay as to have become almost forgotten. A science, nevertheless, which is of greater importance than all the other sciences combined, and without which all science would but subserve the ends of selfishness and aid in man's destruction. I refer to the science of self control. Our modern scientists study the elements and forces which are outside themselves with the object of controlling and utilizing them. The ancients studied the elements and forces which were within themselves with a view to controlling and utilizing them. And the ancients produced such mighty masters of knowledge in this direction that to this day they are held in reverence as gods, and the vast religious organizations of the world are based upon their achievements. Wonderful as are the forces in nature, they are vastly inferior to that combination of intelligent forces which comprise the mind of man, and which dominate and direct the blind mechanical forces of nature. Therefore, it follows that to understand, control, and direct the inner forces of passion, desire, will, and intellect is to be in possession of the destinies of men and nations. As in ordinary science, there are in this divine science degrees of attainment, and a man is great in knowledge, great in himself, and great in his influence on the world, in the measure that he is great in self control. He who understands and dominates the forces of external nature is the natural scientist. But he who understands and dominates the internal forces of the mind is the divine scientist. And the laws which operate in gaining a knowledge of external appearances operate also in gaining a knowledge of internal varieties. A man cannot become an accomplished scientist in a few weeks or months, nay, not even in few years, but only after many years of painstaking investigation can he speak with authority and be ranked among the masters of science. Likewise, a man cannot acquire self control and become possessed of the wisdom and peace giving knowledge which that self control confers, but by many years of patient labor, a labor which is all the more arduous because it is silent and both unrecognized and unappreciated by others. And he who would pursue the science successfully must learn to stand alone and to toil unrewarded, as far as any outward emolument is concerned. The natural scientist pursues in acquiring his particular kind of knowledge the following 5 orderly and sequential steps. Number 1. Observation. That is, he closely and persistently observes the facts of nature. 2. Experiment. Having become acquainted by repeated observations with certain facts, he experiments with those facts with a view to the discovery of natural laws. He puts his facts through rigid processes of analysis and so finds out what is useless and what of value, and he rejects the former and retains the latter. Third, classification. Having accumulated and verified a mass of facts by numberless observations and experiments, he commences to classify those facts, to arrange them in orderly groups with the object of discovering some underlying law, some hidden and unifying principle, which governs, regulates, and binds together these facts. 4. Deduction. Thus, he passes on to the fourth step of deduction from the facts and results which are before him. He discovers certain invariable modes of action and thus reveals the hidden laws of things. 5. Knowledge. Having proven and established certain laws, it may be said of such a man that he knows. He is a scientist, a man of knowledge. But the attainment of scientific knowledge is not the end, great as it is. Men do not attain knowledge for themselves alone, nor to keep it locked secretly in their hearts, like a beautiful jewel in a dark chest. The end of such knowledge is use, service, the increase of the comfort and happiness of the world. Thus, when a man has become a scientist, he gives the world the benefit of his knowledge and unselfishly bestows upon mankind the results of all his labors. Thus, beyond knowledge, there is a further step of use, that is, the right and unselfish use of the knowledge acquired, the application of knowledge to invention for the common weal. It will be noted that the 5 steps or processes follow in orderly succession, and that no man can become a scientist who omits any one of them. Without the first step of systematic observation, for instance, he could not even enter the realm of knowledge of nature's secrets. At first, the searcher for such knowledge has before him a universe of things. These things he does not understand. Many of them, indeed, seem to be irreconcilably opposed one to the other, and there is apparent confusion. But by patiently and laboriously pursuing these 5 processes, he discovers the order, nature, and essence of things, perceives the central law or laws which bind them together in harmonious relationship, and so puts an end to confusion and ignorance. As with the natural scientist, so with the divine scientist, he must pursue with the same self-sacrificing diligence 5 progressive steps in the attainment of self-knowledge, self-control. These 5 steps are the same as with the natural scientist, but the process is reversed. The mind, instead of being centered upon external things, is turned back upon itself, and the investigations are pursued in the realm of one's own mind instead of in that of matter. At first, the searcher for divine knowledge is confronted with that mass of desires, passions, emotions, ideas, and intellections which he calls himself, which is the basis of all his actions, and from which his life proceeds. This combination of invisible yet powerful forces appears confusedly. Some of them stand apparently in direct conflict with each other, without any appearance or hope of reconciliation. His mind, in its entirety too, with his life which proceeds from that mind, does not seem to have any equitable relation to many other minds, and lives about him, and altogether there is a condition of pain and confusion from which he would fain escape. Thus, he begins by keenly realizing his state of ignorance, for no one could acquire either natural or divine knowledge if he were convinced that, without study or labor, he already possessed it. With such perception of one's ignorance, There comes the desire for knowledge, and the novice in self control enters upon the ascending pathway in which are the following five steps. Number one, introspection. This coincides with the observation of the natural scientist. The mental eye is turned like a searchlight upon the inner things of the mind, and its subtle and ever varying processes are observed and carefully noted. This stepping aside from selfish gratifications, from the excitements of worldly pleasures and ambitions in order to observe with the object of understanding one's nature is the beginning of self control. Hitherto, the man has been blindly and impotently borne along by the impulses of his nature, the mere creature of things and circumstances. But now he puts a check upon his impulses and, instead of being controlled, begins to control. 2. Self analysis. Having observed the tendencies of the mind, they are then closely examined and are put through a rigid process of analysis. The evil tendencies, those that produce painful effects, are separated from the good tendencies, those that produce peaceful effects. And the various tendencies with the particular actions they produce, and the definite results which invariably spring from these actions are gradually grasped by the understanding, which is at last enabled to follow them in their swift and subtle interplay and profound ramifications. It is a process of testing and proving, and for the searcher, a period of being tested and proved. 3. Adjustment. By this time, the practical student of things divine has clearly before him every tendency and aspect of his nature, down to the profoundest promptings of his mind and the most subtle motives of his heart. There is not a spot or corner left which he has not explored and illuminated with the light of self examination. He is familiar with every weak and selfish point, every strong and virtuous quality. It is considered the height of wisdom to be able to see ourselves as others see us. But the practitioner of self control goes far beyond this. He not only sees himself as others see him, he sees himself as he is. Thus, standing face to face with himself, not striving to hide away from any secret fault, no longer defending himself with pleasant flatteries, neither underrating nor overrating himself or his powers, and no more cursed with self praise or self pity. He sees the full magnitude of the task which lies before him, sees clearly ahead the heights of self control, and knows what work he has to do to reach them. He is no longer in a state of confusion, but has gained a glimpse of the laws which operate in the world of thought, and he now begins to adjust his mind in accordance with those laws. This is a process of weeding, sifting, cleansing. As the farmer weeds, cleans, and prepares the ground for his crops, so the student removes the weeds of evil from his mind, cleanses and purifies it, preparatory to sowing the seeds of righteous actions, which shall produce the harvest of a well ordered life. 4th, righteousness. Having adjusted his thoughts and deeds to those minor laws which operate in mental activities in the production of pain and pleasure, unrest and peace, sorrow and bliss, he now perceives that there is involved in those laws one great central law which, like the law of gravitation in the natural world, is supreme in the world of mind, a law to which all thoughts and deeds are subservient, and by which they are regulated and kept in their proper sphere. This is the law of justice or righteousness, which is universal and supreme. To this law he now conforms. Instead of thinking and acting blindly, as the nature is stimulated and appealed to by outward things, he subordinates his thoughts and deeds to this central principle. He no longer acts from self, but does what is right, what is universally and eternally right. He is no longer the abject slave of his nature and circumstances. He is the master of his nature and circumstances. He is no longer carried hither and thither on the forces of his mind. He controls and guides those forces to the accomplishment of his purposes. Thus, having his nature in control and subjection, not thinking thoughts nor doing deeds which oppose the righteous law and which, therefore, that law annuls with suffering and defeat, he rises above the dominion of sin and sorrow, ignorance and doubt, and is strong and calm and peaceful. 5. Pure knowledge. By thinking right and acting right, he proves by experience the existence of the divine law on which the mind is framed, and which is the guiding and unifying principle in all human affairs and events, whether individual or national. Thus, by perfecting himself in self-control, he acquires divine knowledge. He reaches the point where it may be said of him, as of the natural scientist, that he knows. He has mastered the science of self control and has brought knowledge out of ignorance, order out of confusion. He has acquired that knowledge of self, which includes knowledge of all men, that knowledge of one's own life, which embraces knowledge of all life. As for all minds are the same in essence, differing only in degree, are framed upon the same law, and the same thoughts and acts, by whatsoever individual they are wrought, will always produce the same results. But by this divine and peace bestowing knowledge, as in the case of the natural scientist, is not gained for one's self alone. For if this was so, the aim of evolution would be frustrated. And it is not the nature of things to fall short of ripening and accomplishment. And indeed, he who thought to gain this knowledge solely for his own happiness would most surely fail. So, beyond the fifth step of pure knowledge, there is a still further one of wisdom, which is the right application of the knowledge acquired, the pouring out upon the world unselfishly and without stint the result of one's labors, thus accelerating progress and uplifting humanity. It may be said of men who have not gone back into their own nature to control and purify it, that they cannot clearly distinguish between good and evil, right and wrong. They reach after those things which they think will give them pleasure and try to avoid those things which they believe will cause them pain. The source of their actions is self, and they only discover right painfully and in a fragmentary way, by periodically passing through severe sufferings and lashings of conscience. But he who practices self control, passing through the five processes, which are five stages of growth, gains that knowledge which enables him to act from the moral law which sustains the universe. He knows good and evil, right and wrong, and thus, knowing them, lives in accordance with good and right. He no longer needs to consider what is pleasant or what is unpleasant, but does what is right. His nature is in harmony with his conscience, and there is no remorse. His mind is in unison with the great law, and there is no more suffering and sin. For him, evil is ended, and good is all in all. It is an axiom with the scientists that every effect is related to a cause. Apply this to the realm of human conduct, and there is revealed the principle of justice. Every scientist knows, and now all men believe, that perfect harmony prevails throughout every portion of the physical universe, from the speck of dust to the greatest sun. Everywhere there is exquisite adjustment. In the sidereal universe, with its millions of suns rolling majestically through space and carrying with them their respective systems of revolving planets, its vast nebula, its seas of meteors, and its vast army of comets traveling through illimitable space with inconceivable velocity, perfect order prevails. And again, in the natural world, with its multitudinous aspects of life and its infinite variety of forms, there are the clearly defined limits of specific laws through the operation of which all confusion is avoided and unity and harmony eternally obtained. If this universal harmony could be arbitrarily broken, even in one small particular, the universe would cease to be. There could be no cosmos, but only universal chaos. Nor can it be possible in such a universe of law that there should exist any personal power which is above, outside, and superior to such law in the sense that it can defy it or set it aside, for whatsoever beings exist, whether they be men or gods, they exist by virtue of such law. And the highest, best, and wisest among all beings would manifest his greater wisdom by his more complete obedience to that law which is wiser than wisdom. And then, with nothing more perfect could be devised. All things, whether visible or invisible, are subservient to and fall within the scope of this infinite and eternal law of causation. As all things seen obey it, so all things unseen, the thoughts and deeds of men, whether secret or open, cannot escape it. Do right, it recompenseth. Do one wrong, the equal retribution must be made. Perfect justice upholds the universe. Perfect justice regulates human life and conduct. All the varying conditions of life as they obtain in the world today are the result of this law reacting on human conduct. Man can and does choose what causes he shall set in operation. But he cannot change the nature of effects. He can decide what thoughts he shall think and what deeds he shall do. But he has no power over the results of those thoughts and deeds. These are regulated by the overruling law. Man has all power to act, but his power ends with the act committed. The result of the act cannot be altered, annulled, or escaped. It is irrevocable. Evil thoughts and deeds produce conditions of suffering. good thoughts and deeds determine conditions of blessedness. This man's power is limited to, and his blessedness or misery is determined by his own conduct. To know this truth renders life simple, plain, and unmistakable. All the crooked paths are straightened out, the heights of wisdom are revealed, and the open door to salvation from evil and suffering is perceived and entered. Life may be likened to a sum in arithmetic. It is bewilderingly difficult and complex to the pupil who has not yet grasped the key to its correct solution. But once this is perceived and laid hold of, it becomes as astonishingly simple as it was formerly profoundly perplexing. Some idea of this relative simplicity and complexity of life may be grasped by fully recognizing and realizing the fact that while there are scores and perhaps hundreds of ways in which a sum may be done wrong, there is only one way by which it can be done right. And that, when that right way is found, the pupil knows it to be the right. His perplexity vanishes, and he knows that he has mastered the problem. It is true that the pupil, while doing his sum incorrectly, may and frequently does think he has done it correctly, but he is not sure. His perplexity is still there. And if he is an earnest and apt pupil, he will recognize his own error when it is pointed out by the teacher. So, in life, men may think they are living rightly while they are continuing, through ignorance, to live wrongly. But the presence of doubt, perplexity, and unhappiness are sure indications that the right way has not yet been found. There are foolish and careless pupils who would like to pass a sum as correct before they have acquired a true knowledge of figures, but the eye and skill of the teacher quickly detect and expose the fallacy. So in life there can be no falsifying of results. The eye of the great law reveals and exposes. 2 eyes 5 will make 10 to all eternity, and no amount of ignorance, stupidity, or delusion can bring the result up to 11. If one looks superficially at a piece of cloth, he sees it as a piece of cloth, but if he goes further and inquires into its manufacture and examines it closely and attentively, he sees that it is composed of a combination of individual threads, and that while all the threads are interdependent, each thread pursues its own way throughout, never becoming confused with its sister thread. It is this entire absence of confusion between the particular threads which constitutes the finished work, a piece of cloth. Any inharmonious commingling of the thread would result in a bundle of waste or a useless rag. Life is like a piece of cloth, and the threads of which it is composed are individual lives. The threads, while being interdependent, are not confounded one with the other. Each follows its own course. Each individual suffers and enjoys the consequences of his own deeds, and not of the deeds of another. The course of each is simple and definite, the whole forming a complicated yet harmonious combination of sequences. There are action and reaction, deed and consequence, cause and effect, and the counterbalancing reaction. Consequence and effect is always in exact ratio with the initiatory impulse. A durable and satisfactory piece of cloth cannot be made from shoddy material, and the threads of selfish thoughts and bad deeds will not produce a useful and beautiful life, a life that will wear well and bear close inspection. Each man makes or mars his own life. It is not made or marred by his neighbor or by anything external to himself. Each thought he thinks, each deed he does, is another thread, shoddy or genuine, woven into the garment of his life. And as he makes the garment, so must he wear it. He is not responsible for his neighbor's deeds. He is not the custodian of his neighbor's actions. He is responsible only for his own deeds. He is the custodian of his own actions. The problem of evil subsists in a man's own evil deeds, and it is solved when those deeds are purified, says Rousseau. Man seek no longer the origin of evil. Thou thyself art its origin. Effect can never be divorced from cause. It can never be of a different nature from cause, Emerson says. Justice is not postponed. A perfect equity adjusts the balance in all parts of life. And there is a profound sense in which cause and effect are simultaneous and form one perfect whole. Thus, upon the instant that a man thinks, say, a cruel thought or does a cruel deed, that same instant he has injured his own mind. He is not the same man he was the previous instant. He is a little viler and a little more unhappy, and a number of such successive thoughts and deeds would produce a cruel and wretched man. The same thing applies to the contrary, the thinking of a kind thought or doing a kind deed, and immediate nobility and happiness attend it. The man is better than he was before, and a number of such deeds would produce a great and blissful soul. Thus, individual human conduct determines by the faultless law of cause and effect individual merit or demerit, individual greatness or meanness, individual happiness or wretchedness. What a man thinks, that he does; what he does, that he is. If he is perplexed, unhappy, restless, or wretched, let him look to himself, for there and nowhere else is the source of all his trouble. Without strength of mind, nothing worthy of accomplishment can be done, and the cultivation of that steadfastness and stability of character which is commonly called willpower is one of the foremost duties of man, for its possession is essentially necessary both to his temporal and eternal well-being. Fixedness of purpose is at the root of all successful efforts, whether in things worldly or spiritual, and without it, man cannot be otherwise than wretched and dependent upon others for that support which should be found within himself. The mystery which has been thrown around the subject of cultivation of the will by those who advertise to sell occult advice on the matter for so many dollars should be avoided and dispelled, for nothing could be further removed from secrecy and mystery than the practical methods by which alone strength of will can be developed. The true path of will cultivation is only to be found in the common everyday life of the individual, and so obvious and simple is it that the majority looking for something complicated and mysterious pass it by unnoticed. A little logical thought will soon convince a man that he cannot be both weak and strong at the same time, that he cannot develop a stronger will while remaining a slave to weak indulgences, and that, therefore, the direct and only way to the greater strength is to assail and conquer his weaknesses. All the means for the cultivation of the will are already at hand in the mind and life of the individual. They reside in the weak side of his character, by attacking and vanquishing which the necessary strength of will be developed. He who has succeeded in grasping this simple preliminary truth will perceive that the whole science of will cultivation is embodied in the following 7 rules. Number 1. Break off bad habits. Number 2. Form good habits. Number 3. Give scrupulous attention to the duty of the present moment. Number 4. Do vigorously and at once whatever has to be done. Number 5. Live by rule. Number 6. Control the tongue. And number 7. Control the mind. Anyone who earnestly meditates upon and diligently practices the above rules will not fail to develop that purity of purpose and power of will which will enable him to successfully cope with every difficulty and pass triumphantly through every emergency. It will be seen that the first step is the breaking away from bad habits. This is no easy task. It demands the putting forth of great efforts or a succession of efforts, and it is by such efforts that the will can alone be invigorated and fortified. If one refuses to take the first step, he cannot increase in willpower, for by submitting to a bad habit because of the immediate pleasure which it affords, one forfeits the right to rule over himself and is so far a weak slave. He who thus avoids self-discipline and looks about for some occult secrets for gaining willpower at the expenditure of little or no effort on his part is deluding himself and is weakening the willpower which he already possesses. The increased strength of will which is gained by success in overcoming bad habits enables one to initiate good habits, for while the conquering of a bad habit requires merely strength of purpose, the forming of a new one necessitates the intelligent direction of purpose. To do this, a man must be mentally active and energetic, and must keep a constant watch upon himself. As a man succeeds in perfecting himself in the second rule, it will not be very difficult for him to observe the third, that of giving scrupulous attention to the duty of the present moment. Thoroughness is a step in the development of the will which cannot be passed over. Slipshod work is an indication of weakness. Perfection should be aimed at even in the smallest task, by not dividing the mind, but giving the whole attention to each separate task as it presents itself. Singleness of purpose and intense concentration of mind are gradually gained, 2 mental powers which give weight and worth of character, and bring repose and joy to their possessor. The fourth rule, that of doing vigorously and at once whatever has to be done, is equally important. Idleness and a strong will cannot go together, and procrastination is a total barrier to the acquisition of purposeful action. Nothing should be put off until another time, not even for a few minutes. That which ought to be done now should be done now. This seems a little thing, but it is of far-reaching importance. It leads to strength, success, and peace. The man who is to manifest a cultivated will must also live by certain fixed rules. He must not blindly gratify his passions and impulses, but must school them to obedience. He should live according to principle and not according to passion. He should decide what he will eat and drink and where, and what he will not eat and drink and where, how many meals per day he will have, and at what times he will have them, at what time he will go to bed, and at what time get up. He should make rules for the right government of his conduct in every department of his life and should religiously adhere to them. To live loosely and indiscriminately, eating and drinking and sensually indulging at the beck and call of appetite and inclination, is to be a mere animal and not a man with will and reason. The beast in man must be scourged and disciplined and brought into subjection, and this can only be done by training the mind and life on certain fixed rules of right conduct. The saint attains to holiness by not violating his vows, and the man who lives according to good and fixed rules is strong to accomplish his purpose. The sixth rule, that of controlling the tongue, must be practiced until one has perfect command of his speech, so that he utters nothing in peevishness, anger, irritability, or with evil intent. The man of strong will does not allow his tongue to run thoughtlessly and without check. All these six rules, if faithfully practiced, will lead up to the seventh, which is the most important of them all, namely, rightly controlling the mind. Self control is the most essential thing in life, yet least understood. But he who patiently practices the rules herein laid down, bringing them into requisition in all his ways and undertakings, will learn by his own experience and efforts how to control and train his mind, and to earn thereby the supreme crown of manhood, the crown of a perfectly poised will.